This video was sponsored by Morning Brew. Hey, happy Friday. This week China decided to limit how many hours of video games people can play in the country. Apple and Google lost many of their App Store monopolies, and Google started working on their own chips for Chromebooks. Our tech knowledge quiz this week is all about consoles. See how many questions you can get right about them. Links are in the description, and welcome to the Friday checkout. Okay, my release highlights this week start with Fossil's Gen 6 smartwatches, which come with the Snapdragon 4100 Plus processor and will be Fossil's first watches to get Wear OS 3 as an update next year. So this series is both more expensive and has weaker processors and has older software than the Galaxy Watch 4 series, meaning that Samsung is likely to dominate the Wear OS category this year completely. Second, Philips has revamped basically their whole Hue lineup with new light tubes, standing lights, light strips, and brighter outputs on their colored light bulbs, as well as an updated app. And finally, we also have the Bose QC45s, which are the successors of the QC35s that kind of started this whole wireless noise-canceling headphone boom, and should bring even more competition to the high-end market. To see all of the new releases this week, including prices, links, and other details, visit the release monitor in the Crowd app and upvote your favorites. Links are in the description. Okay, and my first story of the week will be the Chinese government introducing a new regulation that limits children to no more than 3 hours of online gaming per week. This is a follow-up on a previous set of rules from 2019 that already introduced 90-minute daily limits before, and the new rules get even stricter by limiting anyone under 18 to play only in 3 allocated time slots, specifically Friday, Saturday, and Sunday from 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. That is incredibly weirdly specific, and it of course only covers modern online games, so if somebody has, for example, an older Game Boy, they can play as much Pokemon as they want. Which is something people still do, right? It's not just me. Anyway, the burden of enforcing the limits is put on the game makers themselves, who will have to ask for real identification from each player, and the regulations come after game publishers like Tencent have already added mandatory real-time face recognition to their mobile games to make sure that the person that is saying is playing the game is actually the one playing the game. This whole thing makes it feel like the CCP is basically lumping online gaming together with cigarettes and alcohol and gambling, etc. So the messaging is that online games are so addictive and have such negative externalities on children, such as nearsightedness and poor academic performance, that letting parents decide about their gaming habits is not good enough and the government needs to step in. I personally feel that the better approach would have been to force companies to give parents better controls so they can decide how many hours their kids can play rather than the government doing it for them. But let me know what you think down in the comments. Anyway, this rule of course is not happening in a vacuum, since China is in the middle of a huge crackdown on its own tech sector in general after a decade or two of being very laissez-faire. They have introduced the Personal Information Protection Law, essentially China's version of GDPR. There were huge anti-monopoly moves, including blocking mergers and dishing out massive fines for unfair players. The 996 work culture of tech companies that was keeping employees, especially in startups, working from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week is being cracked down on as well. And next to online gaming, lots of other industries are seeing particular regulatory scrutiny as well. The online lending and finance industry was hit early in reaction to the now infamous Jack Ma incidents, but there was also a big crackdown on fake advertising and misleading information from online influencers and streamers, and perhaps most surprisingly, even the country's gigantic private after-school tutoring business was essentially made illegal overnight in an effort to reduce the excessive academic stress caused to students. Chinese tech stocks were down almost 50% a few weeks ago, meaning that regulations combined with pandemic fears have sent real shockwaves through the industry. It really feels like China, after a long time of letting basically anything happen in the tech industry, has decided to compress 2 decades of regulations all into like half a year or something. It's really wild. Okay, and while we are at regulations, let's talk about all the different countries stepping up their regulatory pressure on Apple and Google about their App Store monopolies. So the big news this week was the Japanese Fair Trade Commission concluding that Apple was in fact violating anti-monopoly regulations when it forced app developers to only use Apple's in-app purchases, of which Apple of course took a 15 to 30% commission, and because of the ruling, Apple now had to make some concessions. Now these concessions are only for so-called reader apps for now, which is what Apple calls apps like Netflix or Spotify or Kindle, which basically offer paid access to a library of digital content. So by far not all apps, and these reader apps can now place a single link to an external website that has more info about alternative payment options, which is still pretty limited, but hey, it's progress. Now this new policy appears to be a global one for Apple, and while it is super narrow in scope, given that just last week Apple also had to agree to developers being allowed to email customers about alternative payment methods, and given that South Korea apparently is gearing up to completely outlaw in-app purchase mandates from both Apple and Google on all apps, it's clear that the pressure will just keep mounting and more concessions will have to be made. Okay, and my third story of the week will be a report from Nikkei saying that Google will launch their own chips for Chromebooks as soon as 2023. There's not much that we know about these chips in particular, beside Nikkei saying that they'll be actual CPUs and that Google was inspired by Apple's success apparently, and there's an assumption that Google's chips of course will be based on ARM, but that's about it. Of course, Google is just about to announce their first self-developed smartphone chip in the Pixel 6 II, and they have designed data center chips such as Tensor as well as co-processors such as the Titan series of chips, so they aren't strangers to processor design, but it will be interesting to see if they'll actually compete well on laptops as well. Now you might be wondering why Google feels the need to develop their own chip for Chromebooks when Chromebooks appear to be doing just fine without it, and here's my take. It's becoming increasingly clear that mainstream laptops are going to transition from x86 to ARM in the next few years or maybe a decade. Apple is already doing this with incredible success on macOS, and there are clear moves into this direction on both Windows and Chrome OS as well. But Windows in particular is a complex legacy operating system, and since Microsoft can't just magically force everyone in its ecosystem to adopt a new architecture like Apple can with macOS, their transition will be slow. Chrome OS, on the other hand, already runs on ARM chips by default, and so if Google develops a really good one, faster than Microsoft can massage Windows and Snapdragon processors into a happy coexistence, Chromebooks could end up stealing even more market share from Windows laptops in the future. Now beside these three, there were a lot more tech news in the week, like Apple successfully adding IDs and driving licenses to their wallet app that governments actually accept now, or updates on the court case of Theranos founder Elizabeth Holmes, etc. But since I can't cover everything myself, let me refer you to Morning Brew. Monday to Sunday, this free newsletter covers tech, business, and whatever else is relevant in a form that's actually very similar in length and style to what I do here on my show. The topics are similar to mine and the writing is witty, to the point, and it highlights all the relevant news in a compact form factor, so in just a few minutes every morning you can be up to date when you start your day. As the name suggests, I find that it goes great with my first cup of coffee in the morning, so I can catch up with all that is happening instead of aimlessly scrolling through social media right away. I love waking up to a bit of quick analysis, and signing up takes like 15 seconds, plus it's free, so there's really no reason not to sign up. Click on the link in the description and you will be all set.